Ladies and gentlemen, Archivist here. For 10 days, the warning signs were everywhere, if you knew where to look. European banks quietly dumping U.S. treasuries. NATO fracturing over Arctic resources as the Greenland dispute explodes. Critical undersea cables sabotaged in the Atlantic. Each event isolated? Maybe. Together? A system under stress. But yesterday, the stress reached the core of the global monetary order. The bond market wasn't the target. The dollar wasn't the target. Gold was. On Monday, January 26, 2026, a confidential encrypted communique was transmitted from the headquarters of the Deutsche Bundesbank in Frankfurt directly to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The contents of this letter, leaked to the German financial newspaper Handelsblatt and subsequently confirmed by high-level sources within the Bundestag Budget Committee, are nothing short of explosive. They represent a diplomatic bombshell that threatens to sever the financial trust that has underpinned the Western world since 1945. Germany is officially demanding the immediate and total repatriation of its remaining gold reserves held in United States custody. We are not talking about a small, symbolic transfer of a few bars for a photo op. We are not talking about a gradual rebalancing over the next decade. We are talking about the removal of 1,236 tons of sovereign gold. To put that number into perspective, this represents approximately 37% of Germany's total national wealth in gold, valued at today's soaring spot prices at nearly $194 billion. The letter reportedly sets a strict, non-negotiable timeline. The Bundesbank expects the physical metal to be transported, verified, and secured in Frankfurt vaults by December 31st, 2026. To understand the sheer gravity of this demand, you must understand the history that led us here. During the height of the Cold War, West Germany lived under the constant existential threat of a Soviet invasion. The Fulda Gap was the likely invasion route, and Frankfurt was just miles from the front lines. It was a strategic necessity to store the nation's wealth far away from the tanks of the Red Army. So Germany moved its gold west, to London, to Paris, and most importantly, to the unbreakable fortress of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York in Manhattan. For decades, this arrangement was a symbol of the unbreakable bond between Washington and Bonn, and later Berlin. It was a testament to the fact that American power guaranteed German survival. But the Cold War is long over. The Soviet Union is dust, and the relationship between the United States and Germany has curdled into mutual suspicion and economic warfare. Between 2013 and 2017, in a massive logistical operation that was followed closely by the gold community, the Bundesbank successfully repatriated 674 tons of gold from Paris and New York. At the time, they declared the operation complete. They publicly stated that they would leave the remaining 1,236 tons in New York intentionally. Their official rationale was that this gold was necessary to facilitate foreign exchange operations. In plain English, they argued that if the euro ever collapsed or Germany needed urgent liquidity, having gold in New York allowed them to swap it instantly for US dollars to defend their currency. It was an insurance policy. So why demand it back now? Why break the glass on the emergency alarm in January 2026? The official reason given by German lawmakers, driven by a coalition of budget hawks, the surging opposition parties like the AfD and BSW, and increasingly vocal mainstream economists, is counterparty risk. This is a polite banking term for, we don't trust you anymore. Michael Yeager, the president of the Taxpayers Association of Europe, publicly stated in an interview that sent shockwaves through Brussels, Trump is unpredictable and he does everything to generate revenue. That's why our gold is no longer safe in the Fed's vaults. What happens if the Greenland provocation continues? The risk is increasing that the German Bundesbank will no longer be able to access its gold. Therefore, it should repatriate its reserves. This is not the fringe ranting of a conspiracy theorist. This is a leading voice in European finance articulating a fear that is now pervasive in the halls of power in Berlin. The United States is no longer a partner. It is a predator. Emanuel Munk, a former head of research at the Bundesbank, echoed this sentiment, telling the press, "Given the current geopolitical situation, it seems risky to store so much gold in the U.S. In the interest of greater strategic independence from the U.S., the Bundesbank would therefore be well advised to consider repatriating the gold." This is a sovereign bank run. In a normal bank run, individual depositors line up outside a branch because they fear the bank is insolvent. In a sovereign bank run, nations line up to withdraw their collateral because they fear the hegemon is rogue. Germany represents the smart money of Europe. If they are pulling their funds, it signals to every other central bank, from Rome to Tokyo to Riyadh, that the window to exit is closing. If the Federal Reserve refuses the request, or delays it with bureaucratic excuses about logistics, it confirms the darkest fear of the market. The gold is gone. If the Federal Reserve agrees, it drains the New York vault of nearly 20% of its total holdings in less than a year. This creates a massive physical shortage in the very hub that prices the world's gold. The Berlin demand is the moment the West admits that the era of trust is definitively over. The handshake deals of the 20th century have been replaced by the verify and take possession, paranoid realism of the 21st. Germany is taking its ball and going home, and the game cannot continue without them. The immediate questions sweeping through the precious metals market, from the trading desks in Singapore to the refineries in Switzerland, is simple but terrifying. Does the gold even exist? This is not a conspiracy theory pulled from the depths of the internet. It is a legitimate question of encumbrance and financial plumbing. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York's vault, located 80 feet below street level at 33 Liberty Street, sits on the bedrock of Manhattan. It is arguably the most secure facility on the planet. But the Fed does not own the gold stored there. It merely acts as a custodian for foreign nations and international organizations. The bars sitting in those cages belong to Germany, Italy, the IMF, and others. However, in the opaque, unregulated, and highly leveraged world of central banking and bullion trading, gold is rarely allowed to sit idle. Idle gold pays no interest. It costs money to store. To solve this problem, central banks often engage in gold leasing. They lend their gold to bullion banks, almost the giants like JP Morgan, HSBC, and Scotiabank, in exchange for a small interest rate, the gold lease rate. The bullion banks then take that physical gold and sell it into the market. Why? To suppress the price, to raise cash for other investments, or to hedge their massive derivative positions. The physical bar leaves the vault. It gets melted down. It gets shipped to China or India and turned into jewelry or coins. But on the books of the central bank, the gold is still listed as an asset. It is owed to them by the bullion bank. This creates a situation of rehypothecation. It means that multiple parties believe they own the exact same ounce of gold. 1. Germany thinks it owns the gold sitting in the Fed vault because their ledger says so. 2. The bullion bank thinks it borrowed the gold and has a liability to return it one day. 3. The Chinese investor who bought the physical bar from the bullion bank actually holds the metal in Shanghai. Now, apply this mechanics to the Berlin demand. If Germany demands 1,236 tons of physical metal immediately, the Federal Reserve and its partner bullion banks have a catastrophic mathematical problem. If that gold has been leased out, and forensic analysts estimate that a significant portion of official reserves are indeed encumbered in this way, the metal is not in the vault. To fulfill Germany's order, the Fed, or the bullion banks acting on its behalf, has to go into the open market and buy it back. They have to source 1,236 tons of physical gold in a market that is already in a structural deficit. Buying back 1,200 tons of gold is not like buying 1,200 shares of Apple. The liquidity does not exist. Attempting to source that amount of physical metal would send the spot price to $5,000, $7,000, or even $10,000 an ounce overnight. It would trigger a commercial short squeeze of biblical proportions. The bullion banks, who are short the metal because they sold the least gold, would face infinite losses. They would be bankrupt instantly. This is exactly why the timeline is so critical. Germany gave them 11 months until December 31st, 2026. In the previous repatriation exercise, 2013 to 2017, the Federal Reserve initially claimed it would take 7 years to return just 300 tons. In the end, it took 4 years. Why did it take so long to move 300 tons? You can move that much metal on a few cargo planes in a week. Rumors swirled at the time that the Fed didn't have the original German bars. The bars Germany received were not the same serial numbers they deposited in the 1950s and 60s. Many were newly cast bars with fresh timestamps. This implies the Fed, or its proxies, had to scramble to refine new gold to pay Germany back. They had to rob Peter to pay Paul. Now the demand is 4 times larger, 1,236 tons versus 300 tons. And the timeline is 4 times shorter, 1 year versus 4 years. The math does not work. The market knows the Fed cannot deliver without destroying the price discovery mechanism of the COMEX. This creates a force majeure risk. If the Fed declares it cannot ship the gold due to logistical challenges, security concerns, or geopolitical instability, it is effectively a default. It is an admission that the gold is gone. It confirms that the US dollar is no longer backed by the rule of law or the sanctity of contracts. It confirms that the gold in New York is paper gold, a financial fiction, while physical gold has fled to the east. This realization is why the gold price is currently disconnecting from the dollar and from real rates. The market is beginning to price in the delivery failure. The premium for physical coins is exploding because the smart money knows that when Germany knocks on the door, the vault might be empty. Why is Germany doing this now? Why, after decades of passivity and deference to Washington, Has Berlin decided to pull the trigger? The answer lies in the trauma of the Russia precedent. In February 2022, following the invasion of Ukraine, the United States, the UK, and the EU took an unprecedented step. They froze $300 billion of the central bank of Russia's foreign exchange reserves. These were sovereign assets. Under international law and centuries of custom, central bank reserves were considered sacrosanct. They were immune from seizure, even in war. The US shattered that norm. They weaponized the reserve currency system. While the West celebrated this as a tool to punish Putin, the rest of the world watched in horror. Central bankers in Beijing, Riyadh, Brasilia, and yes, Berlin, learned a terrifying lesson. If you do not hold it, you do not own it. Sovereign immunity does not exist if you cross Washington. Your assets are only yours if the US president agrees with your foreign policy. German economists and policymakers have been watching the recent escalation over the Greenland ultimatum and the looming tariff war with growing terror. President Trump's threat to impose 100% tariffs on countries that do not align with US policy against China has spooked the German industrial base. Germany is an export superpower. Its economy relies on trade. Crucially, major German corporations like Volkswagen, BASF, and Siemens rely on China for up to 40% of their global profits. Germany cannot afford to decouple from China. It would mean deindustrialization and economic depression. But the US is demanding exactly that. The US is forcing Germany to choose. Are you with us, or are you with Beijing? If Germany chooses to maintain its trade ties with China, or even tries to stay neutral, what happens? Does the US declare Germany a currency manipulator? Does the US sanction German companies? And most terrifyingly, what happens to the $194 billion of German gold sitting in the basement of the New York Fed? Could the US freeze German gold just like they froze Russian cash? Could they hold it hostage to force Berlin to comply with sanctions on China? Before 2022, this idea was insane. It was unthinkable between NATO allies. Today, in 2026, it is a legitimate, high-probability risk management scenario. The Greenland provocation, where the US threatened tariffs on European goods to force the sale of Danish territory, was the final straw. It proved that the US views its allies as vassal states to be bullied. Emanuel Monk's statement to Handelsblatt was explicit. Given the current geopolitical situation, it seems risky to store so much gold in the US. The risk is increasing that the Bundesbank will no longer be able to access its gold. The German demand is a defensive move. It is a survival mechanism. They are sanction-proofing their economy. By moving the gold to Frankfurt, they ensure that no matter what diplomatic war erupts over trade, tariffs, or NATO funding, their ultimate collateral is within their physical jurisdiction. They can use it to settle trade with China, India, or Russia without US permission. It is also a signal to the future of the euro. The Eurozone is quietly preparing for a post-dollar world. The European Central Bank, ECB, has been encouraging member states to increase gold reserves. Poland has been buying aggressively, and the Dutch and Hungarians have repatriated. If the euro is to survive a dollar collapse or a global debt reset, it needs a golden anchor. It needs to be backed by something real. Germany's 3,350 tons of gold are that anchor. It is the ballast of the European project, but an anchor is useless if it is stored in the captain's quarters of a rival ship. You cannot stabilize your currency with gold you cannot touch. The repatriation is the physical decoupling of the euro from the dollar. It is the declaration of European monetary independence. It is the end of the transatlantic trust that built the post-war order. Germany is preparing to go it alone. The Berlin demand is the final warning bell for every individual investor on the planet. If the German government, with all its diplomatic channels, its intelligence agencies, and its special relationship with the US, does not trust the Federal Reserve to hold its wealth, why should you? If a G7 nation, a NATO pillar, is worried about confiscation and counterparty risk, you should be absolutely terrified. Germany is telling you that the banking system is not safe. They're telling you that paper claims are worthless in a crisis. So how do you position yourself for a sovereign bank run on gold? How do you protect your wealth when the giants are fighting over the scraps? You follow the archivist protocol. Protocol. Rule 1. Be your own central bank. You must hold physical gold in your immediate possession. Do not rely on ETFs like GLD or IAU. These are financial products. They are paper claims on gold stored in the same vaults, HSBC London, JP Morgan NY, that Germany is trying to escape. If the Fed declares force majeure on Germany, do you think they will honor the claim of a retail ETF investor? Absolutely not. The ETFs will be frozen, or more likely, they will be cash settled. They will pay you out in devalued dollars at a manipulated price, while the real metal becomes unobtainable. You want coins and bars in a safe you control. If you can't hold it, you don't own it. Germany learned this lesson the hard way. They spent 70 years trusting the US, and now they're scrambling to get their asset back. Do not repeat their mistake. Protocol. Rule 2. Avoid unallocated accounts. If you have a precious metals account with a bank or a dealer, you need to check the fine print immediately. Verify if your holdings are allocated or unallocated. Unallocated means you are an unsecured creditor of the bank. You do not own specific bars. You own a slice of a pool of gold that the bank owes you. In a bankruptcy or a bail-in, you become a general creditor. You get nothing. Allocated means specific bars with specific serial numbers are titled to your name. They are your property, legally separate from the bank's assets. But even better than an allocated bank account is segregated storage in a non-banking jurisdiction. Store your metal in a private vault in Singapore, the Cayman Islands, or Switzerland outside the banking system. Get your wealth out of the Western banking jurisdiction entirely. If Germany is leaving New York, you should leave the Western banking system. Protocol Rule 3. Watch the delivery premiums. As this news spreads, the price of paper gold, futures contracts on the COMEX, might be managed or suppressed to hide the panic. But the price of physical gold, coins, bars, will explode. Watch the premium over spot. If the spot price of gold is $2,600, but a Gold Eagle coin costs $3,000, that is the market screaming that there is a shortage. That is the real price. Do not wait for the spot price to move on CNBC. Watch the physical premium at your local dealer. When the premium hits 50%, the decoupling is complete. Buy before that happens. Protocol. Rule 4. Prepare for capital controls. When nations start fighting over collateral, they lock the gates. The U.S. government, facing a run on its gold vaults, may impose capital controls to prevent gold from leaving the country. They might invoke the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, to block the German transfer, citing national security. If they do that to Germany, they can do it to you. They can ban gold exports. They can ban the mailing of gold coins. They can ban crypto withdrawals to offshore wallets. Move a portion of your wealth into a self-sovereign stack, gold, Bitcoin, that cannot be frozen by a swift message or a government decree. The window to move assets across borders is closing. Germany is trying to squeeze through the door before it shuts. You need to be faster than them. The Berlin demand is the beginning of the end for the dollar standard. Germany has called the bluff. They have demanded to see the cards. They want to see the metal. If the metal is there, the Fed loses power because it loses the collateral. If the metal is not there, the system collapses because the fraud is exposed. Either way, the trust is gone. The era of blind faith in the US dollar is over. Get your gold out of the system while the vault door is still slightly ajar. This is Archivist. The protocol is active. Class dismissed.